Locomotion and movement. Movement is one of the significant features of the living beings. Animals and plants exhibit a wide range of movements. Streaming of protoplasm in the unicellular organism like amoeba is a simple form of movement. Movement of cilia, flagella, tentacles are shown by many organisms. Human beings can move limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, etc. Some of the movements results in the change of the place or location. Such voluntary movements are called locomotion. Walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming are all forms of locomotory movements. Locomotory structures need not be different from those affecting other types of movement. For example, in paramecium, cilia helps in the movement of the food through the cytopharynx and in locomotion as well. Hydra can use its tentacles for capturing its prey and also use them for locomotion. We use limbs for changes in the body postures and locomotion as well. The above observations suggest that movement and locomotion cannot be studied separately. The two may be linked by stating that all the locomotions are movement, but all movements are not locomotions. Methods of locomotion performed by the animals vary with their habitats and the demand of the situation. However, locomotion is generally for the search of food, shelter, mate, suitable breeding grounds, favorable climatic conditions, or to escape from enemies or predators. Types of movements. Cells of the human body exhibit three main types of movements, namely amoeboid, ciliary, and muscular. Some specialized cells in our body, like macrophages and leukocytes in blood, exhibits amoeboid movement. It is affected by pseudopodia by the streaming of the protoplasm. Some specialized cells in our body, like macrophages and leukocytes in the blood, exhibits amoeboid movement. It is affected by pseudopodia formed by the streaming of the protoplasm, as in the amoeba. Cytoskeleton elements like microfilaments are also involved in the amoeboid movement. Ciliary movement occurs in most of our internal tubular organs. Ciliary movements occurs in most of our internal tubular organs, which are lined by the ciliated epithelium. The coordinated movements of cilia in the trachea help us in removing dust particles and some of the foreign substances inhaled along with the atmospheric air. Passage of ova through the female reproductive tract is also facilitated by the ciliary movement. Movement of our limbs, jaws, tongue, etc. Require muscular movement. The contractile property of the muscles are affected by the use of locomotion and other movements by the human beings and majority of the multicellular organisms. Locomotion requires a perfect coordinated activity of the muscular, skeleton, and neural systems. Okay, all three systems are required for the locomotion to happen. In this chapter, you will learn about the types of the muscles, their structures, mechanism of their contraction, and important aspect of the skeleton system. Okay, and muscles you have studied in chapter 8 that the cilia and flagella are the outgrowth of the cell membrane, right? And in chapter cells, units of cells, then flagellar movements help in the swimming of the spermatozoa. The movement which help with the help of flagella helps in the swimming of spermatozoa. Okay, maintenance of the water current in the canal system of the sponges. Okay, flagellar movement, and in the locomotion of the protozoans like euglena. Okay, muscles is a specialized tissue of mesodermal origin. About 40 to 50% of the body weight of the human adult is contributed by the muscles. About 40 to 50% of the body weight of the human adult is contributed by the muscles. Muscles is specialized tissue of the mesodermal origin. Okay, They have special properties like excitability, contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. Excitability, then contractibility, then extensibility, and then elasticity. These are the four main properties you have to keep in your mind. You have to learn it by heart. Muscles have been classified using different criteria, namely locomotion, appearance, and the nature of the regulation of their activities. Okay, muscles have been classified using different criteria, namely locomotion, location, appearance, and nature of regulation of their activities. Nature of regulation of their activities. Based on the location, three types of muscles are identified: skeletal, visceral, and cardiac. Skeletal muscles are closely associated with the skeletal components of the body. They have a striped appearance under the microscope, and hence is called striated muscles. As their activity are under the voluntary control of the nervous system, they are known as voluntary muscles. 2. Okay, they are primarily involved in the locomotory actions and the changes of the body postures. Visceral muscles are located in the inner walls of the hollow visceral organs of the body, like alimentary canal, reproductive tract, etc. They do not exhibit any striations and are smooth in appearance. Hence, they are called smooth muscles or non-striated muscles. Their activity are not under the voluntary control of the nervous system, and are visceral muscles we are talking about are located in the inner walls of the hollow visceral organs, visceral muscles. Okay, and like the alimentary canal, reproductive tract, etc. They do not exhibit any striations and are smooth in appearance. They are called smooth muscles or non-striated muscles. Their activities are not under the voluntary control of the nervous system, and are therefore known as involuntary muscles. They assist, for example, in the transportation of the food through the digestive tract and gametes through the genital tract. As the name suggests, cardiac muscles are the muscles of the heart. Many cardiac muscle cells assemble in the branching pattern to form a cardiac muscles. Many cardiac muscle cells assemble in the branching pattern to form a cardiac muscles. Based on the appearance, cardiac muscles are striated. They are involuntary in nature, as the nervous system does not control their activities directly. They are involuntary in nature, as the nervous system does not control their activities directly. Okay. They are striated, but they are involuntary in nature. Okay. Let us examine the skeletal muscles in detail to understand the structure and mechanism of contraction. Each organized skeletal muscles in our body is made up of number of muscle bundles, okay, or fascicles. Muscle bundles held together by a common collagenous connective tissue layer called fascia. Each muscle bundle contains a number of muscle fibers. Okay, and then these are fascicles. We can see the fascicle pointed in the diagram pointed out, and then we have muscle fiber. Each muscle bundles have number of muscle fibers. How many? Contains a number of muscle fibers. Okay, muscle fibers, and they are connected by the collagenous connective tissue called the fascia. Fascicles are connected by fascia, and then each muscle fiber is lined by the plasma membrane called sarcolemma. Each muscle fiber is lined by the we can see here the sarcolemma. Muscle fibers is lined by the plasma membrane called the sarcolemma, and we can see the blood capillaries also pointed out in the diagram. Muscle fibers are also pointed out in the diagram. Muscle fibers are inside. There are many fibers inside the fascicles, which is called muscle bundle, and the fascicle muscle bundles are connected by the connective collagenous tissue, which is called fascia. Okay. sarcolemma we have studied. Enclosing the sarcoplasm. The cytoplasm inside the muscle fiber is called sarcoplasm. Okay, muscle fiber is a syncytium, or as the syncytium, numerous nucleus inside the cytoplasm that is meant for syncytium, as the sarcoplasm contains many nuclei. The endoplasmic reticulum, that is sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fibers, is the storehouse of the calcium ions. Characteristic features of the muscle fiber is the presence of the large number of parallelly arranged filaments in the sarcoplasm, called the myofilaments or myofibrils. Each microfibrils. A characteristic feature of the muscle fiber is the presence of the large number of parallelly arranged filaments in the sarcoplasm. It's called myofilaments or myofibrils. Each myofibril has alternate dark and light bands on it. A detailed study of the myofibrils has established that the striated appearance is due to the distribution of the pattern of the two important proteins, actin and myosin. The light bands contain actin and is called I band or isotropic bands, and whereas the dark band called A or an isotropic band contains myosin. An isotropic band, that is the A band, a dark band, contains myosin. Both the proteins are arranged as rod-like structures parallel to each other, and also to the longitudinal axis of the myofibrils. The actin filaments are thinner as compared to the myosin filaments, hence are called the thin and thick filaments respectively. In the center of the I band there is an elastic fiber called the Z line. I band, which is the light band, has the at its center it has the elastic fiber called the Z line, which bisects into two equal halves, right? And the thin filaments are firmly attached to the Z line. Thin filaments are firmly attached to the Z lines, right? And then the thick filaments in the A band are also held together in the middle. Middle of this band. These are held together in the middle of this band by a thin fibrous membrane called the M line. The A and I bands are arranged alternately throughout the length of the myofibrils. And the portion of the myofibril between the two successive Z lines is called the functional unit of the contraction and is called the sarcomere. In a resting state, the edges of the thin filaments are on either side of the thick filaments, partially overlap the free ends of the thick filaments, and leaving the central part of the thick filaments, right? It is the resting state. The central part of the thick filament not overlapped by the thin filament is called the H zone. Here we can see the diagrams, the diagrammatic representation of anatomy of the muscle fiber showing a sarcomere and also a sarcomere. We can see the Z line. Z line is also marked. That is in between the which bisects the light band, I band. Which bisects the I band, Z line, and it is connected to the thin filaments, that is actin, and the overlapping between that A band, which is where the regions where both the fibers are overlapped, that is the A band, and on the presence of only thick filaments in between the sarcomere is called H zone. The overlapping part is we have studied the portion of the myofibrils between the two thick filament and is also held together in the middle of this band by the thin. It is held together by a thin fibrous membrane called the M line. Where is the M line? We can see the thin fibrous membrane, that's called the M line. We will see it, and that's okay. We can see the Z line. Where is the M line? M line is in between the thick filaments. Here it is written about the M line. In the middle of this band, thick filament, the middle of this band is called the M line. M line is present in the middle of the thick filaments. That is not pointed exactly, but we know where it is. The structure of the contractile proteins. Each actin filament, that is thin filament, is made up of two filamentous actins helically wound to each other. Each F actin is a polymer of the monomeric G actins. Each F actin is a polymer of monomeric G actins, that is the globular actins. Two filaments of each protein, tropomyosin. Two filaments of each protein. Of another protein, tropomyosin, also run close to the F actin throughout its length. And the complex protein, troponin, is distributed at a regular intervals of the tropomyosin. Complex protein, troponin. Here we have studied the another protein, that is tropomyosin, and the troponin is distributed at the regular intervals of the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of the troponin masks the active binding site of the myosin on the active site, actin filaments. Complex protein, troponin, is distributed at the regular intervals of the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of the troponin masks the active binding sites for myosin on the actin filaments. Each myosin, that is the thick filament, is also a polymerized protein. Many monomeric proteins called meromyosins, that is the monomeric proteins, which is meromyosins, constitute one thick filaments. Okay, and each meromyosin has two important parts: globular head with a short arm, globular head with a short arm and a tail, globular head with a short arm and a tail, and the former being the heavy former, that is the head, it is called meromyosin, heavy meromyosin, that is HMM, and the latter, the light meromyosin, that is the short arm and tail, this is the HMM component is the head and the short arm, and the projects outward at regular distance and angle. Projects outward, the HMM component, that is the head and the short arm, projects outward at the regular distance and projects outward at angle from each other. Head and short arm, regular interval, polymerized. The head and the short arm projects outward at the regular distance and the angle from each other from the surface of the polymerized myosin filament and is known as cross arm. The globular head is an active ATPase enzyme and has binding sites for the ATP and active sites for actin. Active sites for actin. Troponin. Here is the diagrammatic representation of the actin or the thin filament and the myosin monomer meromyosin. Here we can see the presence of the troponin and then the tropomyosin, which runs all together with the F actin, that is the filamentous actin, globular, which is made up of the globular actin and tropomyosin and the active binding sites. It is written here that troponin and the complex protein troponin is distributed at the regular intervals on the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of the troponin masks the active binding site for myosin on the actin filaments. on the active filaments. Okay. The globular head of the active ATPase enzyme and has is an active ATPase enzyme and has binding sites for the ATP and active sites for actin. ATPase here we can see in the diagram ATP binding sites are also pointed and the actin binding sites are also pointed at the head. The cross arm is pointed, and the mechanism of the muscle contraction. Mechanism of the muscle contraction is best explained by the sliding filament theory, which states that the contraction of the muscle fiber takes place by the sliding of the thin filaments over the thick filaments. Okay. Muscle contraction is initiated by the signal sent by the central nervous system via motor neuron. A motor neuron along with the muscle fibers connected to it constitute a motor unit. A motor neuron along with the muscle fiber connected to it is called the motor unit. It to constitute a motor unit. The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction or the motor end plate. The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction or a motor end plate. A neural signal reaching this junction releases a neurotransmitter acetylcholine. A neural signal reaching this junction releases a neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which generates an active potential in the sarcolemma. This spreads through the muscle fiber and causes the release of the calcium ion. Okay. The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction or the motor end plate, and neural signal reaching this junction releases a neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which generates an action potential in the sarcolemma, and this spreads through the muscle fiber and causes the release of the calcium ions into the sarcoplasm, and the increase in the calcium level leads to the binding of the calcium into the subunit troponin on the actin filaments, and thereby remove the masking of the active site for the myosin, and utilizing the energy from the ATP hydrolyzes, and the myosin head now binds to the exposed ATP sites of the actin to form a cross bridge. The formation of the cross bridge is better explained in this diagram. Stages in the cross bridge formation: rotation of the head and breaking of the cross bridge is described in this diagram. As we can see, the sliding or rotation here with the formation of the cross bridge. First, actin filament. Here ATP in myosin filament, ATP is hydrolyzed by the and converted into ADP and phosphate and so here the active binding sites are attached to the actin filaments, myosin filament, which gets attached, and the formation of the myosin head is attached to the actin filament, and the cross bridge formation happened, and here the sliding occurred. The breaking of the filament, ATP and ADP is released, so there is an ATP formation, and the breaking of the cross bridge again happened, and this pulls the attached actin filament towards the center of the A band and the Z line attached to these actins are also pulled inwards, thereby causing the shortening of the sarcomere, that is the contraction. It is clear from the above steps that during the shortening of the muscles, that is the contraction, the I bands get reduced, whereas the I bands get reduced, whereas the A bands retain their length. I bands or the light bands get reduced, and A bands retains their length, and the myosin releasing ADP and P1 goes back to its relaxed state, and a new ATP binds, and the cross bridge is broken. The ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head, and the cycle of the cross bridge formation. ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head. And the cycle of the cross bridge formation happened. So here we can see the sliding filament theory of the muscle fiber, movement of the thin filaments, and the relative size of the I band and H band after the contraction happened. So H zone here relaxed in the relaxed state. H zone is well known, and Z line is also clear. Z line, the region between the two Z lines are called sarcomere, which is the unit of contraction, and the I band. I band is the light filament.
Utilite filament. Papa, let go.
Here we can see the contracting muscle fiber filaments get slowly contracted, so the reduction of the I band is visible, and further contracting the I band disappears, and maximally contracted region, the two sarcomeres are reduced to halves, and the total contracted area, the H zone is also contracted, but the A band is retained. There is no change in the length of the A band, and the I band disappeared. So here there are questions related to these topics also. And the breakage, okay, where was the last sentence? The ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head, and the cycle of the cross-base formation and breakage is repeated, causing further sliding, and process continues till the calcium ions pumped back to the sarcoplasmic cisternae, back to the sarcoplasmic cisternae, returning to in the masking of the actin filaments. This causes the return of the Z lines back to their original position, that is the relaxation. The reaction times of the fibers can vary in different functions, different muscles. The reaction time of the fibers may vary in different muscles. Repeated activation of the process continues till the calcium ion are pumped back to the sarcoplasmic cisternae, resulting in the masking of the actin filaments, and this causes the return of the Z lines back to their original positions. So we know we have to keep in mind which is the Z line or H zone. Z lines are in between the I bands. The lines are in between the I bands. H zone is between the and M line is between the thick filaments, that is the A bands, and H zone is the only no overlapping parts, that are only thick filaments, that is called the H zone, and the I band has no only thin filaments. Okay, the Z line and M line. Okay, we know everything about Z lines. Okay, this causes the return of the Z line back to their original position, that is the relaxation. The reaction time of the fibers can vary in different muscles. Repeated activation of the muscles can lead to the accumulation of the lactic acid due to the anaerobic breakdown of the glycogen in them, and causing fatigue. Muscles contain a red colored oxygen storing pigment called the myoglobin. Myoglobin content is high in some of the muscles, which gives a reddish appearance. Such muscles are called red fibers. These muscles also contain plenty of mitochondria, which can utilize a large amount of oxygen stored in them for the ATP production. And these muscles, therefore, can also be called the aerobic muscles. Okay. On the other hand, some of the muscles possess very less quantity of myoglobin and therefore appear pale or whitish. And these are called the white fibers. And number of the mitochondria are also few in them, but the amount of the sarcoplasmic reticulum is high. They depend on the anaerobic process for energy. They usually depends, but about the red fibers, they were called the aerobic muscles. Okay, now we are going to talk about the skeletal system. The skeletal system consists of a framework of bones and a few cartilages. This system has a significant role in the movements shown by the body. Imagine chewing food chewing food without jaw bones and walking around without the limb bones. Bone and cartilage are specialized connective tissue, and the former has a very hard matrix due to the calcium salt in it, and the latter has the slightly pliable matrix due to the chondroitin muscles, chondroitin salts. In human beings, this system is made up of 206 bones and a few cartilages. It is grouped into two principal divisions. The axial and appendicular muscles. In human beings, this system is made up of 206 bones and a few cartilages, and it is grouped into two principal divisions: the axial and the appendicular. Axial, the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton contains 80 bones. 80 bones are distributed along the main axis of the body: the skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs constitute the axial skeleton. The skull is composed of two sets of bones. Okay, we are going to learn about the skull. Here is the diagrammatic view of the human skull. We will come to that after reading the descriptions. Okay, it is composed of two sets of bones. What are these sets? This is the cranial and the facial. And totals to 22 bones. Cranial bones are 8 in number. They form the hard protective outer covering and cranium for the brain, and the facial regions is made up of 14 skeletal muscles, skeletal elements, which form the front part of the skull. Okay, front part of the skull is the facial region, and it has the 14 skeletal elements. A single U-shaped bone called the hyoid is present at the base of the buccal cavity, and is it is also included in the skull. Each middle ear contains 3 tiny bones called malleus, incus, and stapes. Malleus, incus, and stapes, collectively called the ear ossicles. And skull region articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of the two occipital condyles. That is dicondylic skull. We have a dicondylic skull. Okay. Now this is the diagrammatic representation of our skull. The skull has the cranial region and the facial region. The cranial region has the frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone, occipital bone. Okay, and here we can see the occipital condyle. Okay, sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone, lacrimal bone, nasal bone, zygomatic bone, maxilla, mandible, hyoid bone. So sphenoid bone is present at the lateral side. Okay, we will study about that. Ethmoid bone, just read all the names and try to remember all the names. Sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone, lacrimal bone, nasal bone, zygomatic bone, maxilla bone, and mandible, and the hyoid bone. Diagrammatic view of the human skull. Okay, so ear ossicles, and 8 in the cranial and 14 in the just 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Okay, hyoid bone is not included. 8 sphenoid bone, ethmoid 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 at this part, and the other part also contains the 7, though, so it counts as 14. And here 4 cranial bones, that is the frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone, and occipital bone, and the other side also contains these 4 too. So 8 bones. Okay, our vertebral column is formed by our vertebral column is formed by the 26 serially arranged units called the vertebrae, and dorsally placed. Dorsally placed. That is the our vertebral column formed by the 26 serially arranged units called the vertebrae, and 26 and is dorsally placed. It extends from the base of the skull and constitutes the main axis of the framework of the trunk. Each vertebra has central hollow portion, neural canal through which the spinal cord passes. First vertebrae is the atlas, and it articulates with the occipital condyle, and the vertebral column is differentiated into cervical 7, thoracic 12, lumbar 5, sacral 1 fused, and coccygeal 1 fused. The first vertebrae is the atlas, and it articulates with the occipital condyles. And the vertebral column is differentiated into cervical 7 and thoracic 12, lumbar 5, and then the sacral 1 fused and coccygeal 1 fused regions starting from the skull. The number of the cervical vertebrae are 7 in almost all the mammals, including human beings. The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, supports the head, and serves as the point of attachment for the ribs and musculature of the back. Sternum is a flat bone on the ventral midline of the thorax. There are 12 pairs of the ribs. Each rib is a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has two articulation surfaces on its dorsal end and is hence called the bicephalic. That is first 7 pairs of the there are 12 pairs of the ribs. We have talked about the sternum is the flat bone on the ventral midline of the thorax, and the other coccygeal, that is the lumbar. Cervical is 7, and here we will see in the diagram the cervical vertebra, that is in 7 in number. Then the thoracic vertebra, and then comes the lumbar vertebra, and thoracic is 12 in number, lumbar is 5 in number, sacral is 1 fused, sacral and coccygeal is 1 fused. Both are 1 fused vertebrae, and vertebrae. Sternum is a flat bone on the ventral midline of the. There are 12 pairs of the ribs. Each rib has a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has two articulation surfaces on its dorsal side and is hence called the bicephalic. And the first 7 pairs of the ribs are called the true ribs. First 7 pairs, and true ribs, and dorsally they are attached to the thoracic vertebra and ventrally attached to the sternum, and with the help of the hyaline cartilage. The 8th, 9th, and 10th pairs of the ribs do not articulate directly with the sternum, but join the 7th rib with the help of the hyaline cartilage. It joins the 7th ribs, and then here comes these are the called vertebrochondral ribs, that is the false ribs. Vertebro called vertebrochondral ribs. Last 2 pairs, 11th and 12th of the ribs are not connected ventrally and are therefore called the floating ribs. The thoracic vertebra, ribs, and the sternum together form the rib cage. The bone of the vertebra, limbs along with their girdles, bones of the limbs along with their girdles are called appendicular skeleton. Bones of the limbs along with their girdles are called appendicular skeleton. Each limb is made up of 30 bones. Okay, each limb is made up of 30 bones, and the bones of the hand are called four limbs, and are humerus, radius, ulna, and carpals. Wrist bones 8 in number. Metacarpals palm 5 in number. Okay, humerus, radius, ulna. There are 30 bones in each limb. Each limb is made up of 30 bones. The bones of the hand, forelimb, are humerus, radius, ulna, and carpals. Carpals are wrist bones. It is 8 in numbers. Carpals. Metacarpals palm bones, that is 5 in number, and phalanges, digits, 14 in number. Femur, thigh bone, the longest. Tibia and fibula, tarsals. Tarsals is ankle bone, 7 in number, and metatarsal, 5 in number. And then the phalanges, 14 in number, digits, and are the bones of the legs. Bones of the legs, that is the hind limb. A cup-shaped bone called the patella cover the knee, ventrally, kneecap, pectoral, and the pelvic girdle. Pectoral and the pelvic girdle bones help in the articulation of the upper and the lower limbs, respectively, with the axial skeleton. Each girdle is formed of two halves. Each half of the pectoral girdle consists of clavicle and a scapula. Okay, the scapula is a large triangular flat bone situated in the dorsal part of the thorax, between the second and the seventh ribs. The dorsal flat triangular body of the scapula has a slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which projects as flat expanded portion called the acromion. And the clavicle articulates with it. Okay, clavicle articulates with acromion and expanded part. Below the acromion is a depression called the glenoid cavity. Glenoid cavity depression called the glenoid cavity, which articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint, and each clavicle shoulder joint. Each clavicle is a long slender bone with the two curvatures. These bones is commonly called the collarbone. Pelvic girdle consists of two coxal bones. Each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of the three bones, ilium, ischium, and pubis. At the point of the fusion of the above bones is a cavity called acetabulum, to which the thigh bones articulates, and the two halves of the pelvic girdle meet ventrally to form the pubic symphysis containing fibrous cartilage. Pubic symphysis containing fibrous cartilage. Pelvic girdle consists of two coxal bones. Each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of the three bones, ilium, ischium, and pubis. At the point of the fusion of the above bones is called the acetabulum, to which the thigh bones articulate. Acetabulum, which the thigh bones articulate. Two halves of the pelvic girdle meets ventrally to form the pubic symphysis contain the fibrous cartilage. Joints. Okay, here we can see the diagram of all the phalanges, or the pelvic and pectoral girdles. Right pectoral girdle and the upper arm frontal view. That is the formation of the clavicle. Then the pointed one. Here we can see the presence of clavicle that is pointed, and scapula. Scapula is a large triangular flat bone, and the thorax called the second and the seven, between the second and the seven ribs. Okay, and situated in the dorsal part of the scapula has slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which projects as a flat expanded process called the spine called the acromion. Here also we can see the acromion from where clavicle is joint, and slightly below that acromion the clavicle articulates with this. The expanded process, the clavicle below the acromion depression is called glenoid cavity, which articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Each clavicle is long, slender bone with two curvatures. It has the two curvatures, right? Two curvatures, but it is curved structure. Two curvatures, and this bone is known as commonly called collarbones. Joints are essential for all the types of the movement involving the bony part of the body. Locomotory movements are no exceptions to this. Joints are points of contact between the bones or between the bones and the cartilage. Force generated by the muscle is used to carry out movement through the joints, where the joint acts as a fulcrum. The movability at these joints vary depending on different factors. Joints have been classified into three major structural forms. Namely fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. Fibrous joints do not allow any movement. This type of joint is shown by the flat skull bones, which fuse end to end with the help of dense joints are the points of contact between the bones or between bones and the cartilage. Force generated by the muscles is used to carry out movement through the joints. Force generated by the muscles is used to carry out movement through the joints, where the joint acts as a fulcrum. Joints are the points of contact between the bones or between the bones and cartilage. The movability at these joints vary depending upon different factors. Joints have been classified into three major structural forms, namely fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. Fibrous joints do not allow any movement. This type of joint is shown by the flat skull bones, which fuse end to end with the help of dense fibrous connective tissue in the form of sutures to form the cranium. In cartilaginous joints, the bones that is the fibrous joints and then the cartilaginous joint, the bones involved are joined together with the help of cartilages. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae is the vertebral column. In the vertebral column is of the form of the pattern, and it permits the limited movements, right? Joined together with the help of the cartilages. And then synovial joints are characterized by the presence of the fluid-filled synovial cavity between the articulating surfaces of the two bones. Articulated surfaces of the two bones, and such an arrangement allows considerable movement. These joints help in the locomotion and many other movements. Ball and socket joints between the humerus and pectoral girdle. These joints help in the locomotion and many other movements. Hinge joints, knee joints, pivot joints between the atlas and axis, and gliding joint between the carpals and saddle joint, between the carpal and metacarpal. Between the carpals, gliding joints. Between the carpal and metacarpal, that is saddle joints, are some examples. Disorders of the muscular and skeletal muscles, skeletal systems. Myasthenia gravis, autoimmune disorder affecting neuromuscular junction, leading to the fatigue, weakening, and paralysis of the skeletal muscles. It is an autoimmune disorder, myasthenia gravis, affecting the neuromuscular junction leading to fatigue, weakening and paralysis of skeletal muscles, myasthenia gravis. Muscular dystrophy, progressive degeneration of the skeletal muscles, mostly due to the genetic disorder. Progressive degeneration of the skeletal muscular dystrophy. Tetany, rapid spasms, wild contractions in the muscle due to the low calcium in the body fluid. Low calcium level in the body fluid. Arthritis, that is the inflammation of the joints. Arthritis. And osteoporosis, age-related disorder. Age-related disorder characterized by the decreased bone mass and increased chances of fractures, and decreased levels of the estrogen in the common cause. Osteoporosis, gout, inflammation of the joints due to the accumulation of the uric acid crystals. Summary: movement is an essential. Okay, first gout, inflammation of the joints due to the accumulation of the uric acid crystals. Summary: movement is an essential feature of all the living beings. Protoplasmic streaming, ciliary movements, and movement of the fins, limbs, wings, etc. are some forms exhibited by animals. The voluntary movement which causes the animals to change its place is called the locomotion. Animals move generally in search of food, shelter, mate, breeding ground, better climate, or to protect themselves. The cells of the human body exhibit amoeboid, ciliary, and muscular movement exhibits in locomotion. 3 types of muscles are present in our body. Skeletal muscles are attached to the skeletal elements. They appear striated and voluntary in nature. Visceral muscle, voluntary in nature. Visceral muscles present in the inner walls of the visceral organs are non-striated and involuntary. Cardiac muscles are the muscles of the heart, and they are striated and branched and involuntary. Muscles possess excitability, contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. Okay. 3 E's and C. Okay. E, excitability, extensibility, elasticity, and contractibility. Okay, muscle fibers is the anatomical unit of the muscle. Each muscle fiber has many parallelly arranged myofibrils. Each myofibrils contains many serially arranged units called the sarcomere, which are functional units. Each sarcomere has a central A bands and made up of thick myosin filaments, and the 2 half I bands made up of thin actin filaments. 2 half I bands made up of thin actin filaments on either side is of it marked by Z lines. Actin and myosin are polymerized proteins with contractility. Okay, contractility. The active sites of the myosin on the resting actin filament are masked by the protein called the troponin. Myosin head contains ATPase and has ATP binding sites and active sites for actin. And the motor neuron carries signal to the muscle fiber. Which generates an action potential in it. This causes the release of the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the calcium activates the actin, which binds the myosin head to the in the form of cross bridge. These cross bridges pull actin filament, causing them to slide over the myosin filament and thereby causing the contraction. Calcium are then returned to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which inactivate the actin, and cross bridges are broken and the muscles relax. Repeated stimulation of the muscles leads to fatigue. Muscles are classified as the red and white fibers based upon the primarily amount of the red colored myoglobin pigment in them, and bones and cartilages constitute our skeletal system. The skeletal system is divisible into axial and appendicular skeleton. The skull, vertebral column, ribs, and sternum constitute the axial skeleton, and limb bones and girdles form the appendicular skeleton. 3 types of joints are present in between the bones or between the bones and the cartilage. Fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, synovial joints. Synovial joints allow considerable movement and therefore play a significant role in the locomotion. Once again, we will go through the synovial joints because it has many examples which comes in the form of questions. Help in the locomotions. Okay. Locomotion and many other movements. Ball and socket joints between the humerus and the pectoral girdle. Hinge joint, knee joint. Pivot joint that is in between the atlas and axis. Gliding joint in between the carpus, and saddle joint in between the metacarpals and carpus. Gliding joint in between the carpus and gliding joint and saddle joint is between the carpus and the metacarpals of the thumb. Okay, metacarpal of thumb. Carpus and metacarpals of the thumb are some examples, right? Yeah. Thank you. We will be reading all those other chapters too in a few days. Stay tuned. Bye bye.